Welcome to A Celtic State of Mind. I'm Paul John Dykes, and today I'm joined by JP Mason. And it's an absolute pleasure to be back on the show, because I only appear twice a week now, JP, to give some people some peace from my voice and also my face. But here I am, and it's an absolute pleasure to be here. I'm looking at a quite outstanding Mogwai hoodie top and an away jersey. And I remember the first time that I opened the ACSOM bulletin by asking you about the Celtic jersey, there were comments coming on and saying, I'm not here to listen about jerseys, you pair of anoraks, and switching off. But listen, I'm going to ask you about that jersey behind you, because it's a jersey I know and loved, and I'm going to say it, I think it's aged very, very well. Talk to me about that. What was it, a Space Invaders design that we had back in 1989, 90?
I don't know. I think it was 89. Yeah. I mean, this is like back in the early days of like my first couple of years of supporting Celtic. That was one of the strips, and I can't confess that this is an original. It is an original strip. It's the actual strip from that time, but it's not mine. I bought this on eBay sometime in the mid-noughties, before the retro strip thing had really become a thing. So I think I got in there. Like, I mean, this. Probably a guy offered me money for this on an away trip somewhere. I can't remember where it was. I was absolutely steaming. But a guy came up to me in a pub and was just like, I'll buy that for you, mate. £100. And I was like, well, one, I'll be left with no top. And no, two, it's not for sale. So, but yeah, I have fond memories of it. And I don't know why people have a go at it, because I think it's great.
Well, the time you came through to Stirling to record your first appearance on A Celtic State of Mind, you wore the other away jersey that divides opinion, which was the zigzag effort. Yeah. I'm actually looking for an image here, but I will find it at some point during the bulletin. And that was a zigzag effort from the early 90s as well. These two have gone down in the history books. They certainly divide opinion. But the player I remember, I mean, when you look at a jersey, you always think of a player. What player do you think of when you look at that yellow jersey behind you?
I think Peter Grant, for some reason. I don't know why. That is, like, you ask me a question, I'll give you the immediate answer. Is Peter Grant is my first go-to. I don't know why, but I don't think it was worn that much. I mean, I'm sure some statos could probably reel out the numbers on how many it's actually worn, but I don't think it was worn overly in games.
I'm thinking St Mirren and Dunfermline. I remember watching us at Love Street, where we beat St Mirren 1-0. Joe Miller scored the goal. It was a week before the Scottish Cup final, where we stopped the treble and Joe Miller scored the goal against Rangers. And that was in the interim period, because you know how your mind plays a wee bit of tricks on you sometimes, JP, and you think about that time where Mo Johnston said he would sign for us, and he was unveiled wearing the centenary jersey, then he signed for Rangers. There was actually a period of time in between that. It wasn't just like days, there was a lengthy period of time, and during that period of time, Maurice Johnston was at that game in the stand wearing a pair of shades, and he was sitting next to Davy Provan. He was sitting next to Davy Provan. There's two great names from Celtic's past or present. He was sitting next to Davy Provan. That jersey hadn't long been released, and people, I remember walking up to Love Street and people were wearing that jersey with 9 on the back, Johnston. 9 Johnston. I do remember that, and I know one of the people who was wearing the jersey, but I'm not going to name and shame him, but he did admit that he appeared in a newspaper that week of Mo Johnston signing for Rangers. I think he was wanting his money back, but he didn't get it.
The number will still be on the top, but I'd like the name though.
No, Johnston. But the thing is, you didn't really get your name on the back of the jersey back then, did you? Because it wasn't a thing. It wasn't like the squad numbers with the name. It wasn't a thing back then.
Celtic didn't have numbers on the back of the strips until it was some early to mid 90s or something, when they eventually had to conform to UEFA. Sadly, I had to do a lot of research on that for my latest book, JP. I say my latest book. It's the second coming. It's taken 5 years to pull together. It's insane, to such a point that I've retired for writing. But I've done loads and loads of research on the numbers game. I think that's the name of the title, the chapter. The game that you're talking about is we ended up, Fergus McCann had taken over, and we had never worn the numbers on the hoops unless it was a European game. There was a couple of friendlies back in the day. Actually, back in the 60s, there were a couple of friendly games where we wore gold numbers on the back of the hoops as an experiment. But we never ever did it until we were forced to do it.
And Fergus tried to pull a flanker by just having them on the sleeves. So he had the numbers on the sleeves rather than on the back. And eventually was told that's not good enough. You're going to have to wear them on the back. And he finally relented, and it's been numbers on the back ever since of the hoops. But certainly the away strips, we would have the numbers on the back. But, that was back in the day. Let's pull it right up to the present and focus on that Mogwai top. Mogwai number one. JP, how delighted were you with that?
I still am. Somebody slagged me in the comments for saying, "Oh, here's JP talking about his famous pals again." And I'm like, well, I doubt I'm ever likely to have friends who are number one in the UK charts again. I hope I do. I mean, but it might be a long time before that happens. So if I kind of get excited about people that I know doing well, then it's game's a bogey, I think, at that point. But yeah, I'm delighted for them, and it's number 9 in America as well. It's
brilliant,
absolutely amazing.
Brilliant.
From an independent artist, to do that, it's class. And the guy that they were up against was cutting about London in a tank, paid for by his record label. So it's kind of very 90s kind of chart battle. That
reminded me, I know we've not spoken yet about the current state of affairs at Celtic. We will get round to it, JP, but we're a diverse, broad church here at Celtic State of Mind. And I get excited because I'm only allowed to appear on it twice a week, so I do cover the match days. So there's loads to talk about. But the last time I remember someone promoting their music using a tank was the Super Furry Animals.
Yeah.
They did that.
Aye, yeah, they did.
They did that. Was it God Show Me Magic? Was it the single? Something reminds me about that time. But anyway, yeah, big shout out to Mogwai, and superb. It was a superb kind of achievement. I don't know if I've bored you with this before, but I went through a period where I counted all the Mogwai albums. I says, right, I need to dedicate a month of my life to each album. Mm-hmm. And at that time I was working in a job where I was sitting listening to music all day. And I did that, for a month at a time, properly immerse myself in the band. And I'm currently doing it with Radiohead. So I'm on OK Computer at the moment. These are the things you do when you get.
You'll not put it away either. You can't put OK Computer away. If you start in that, then you'll go down the path.
Now, those 3 albums, I've got to say, those 3 albums, I bought into them at the time, the first 3 Radiohead albums, and then my interest in the band waned. And I've said this before, I think that really is a trend with me though, JP. I get into a band and I'm like right into them, go and see them live, get all the bootlegs, everything. But after 3 albums, I move on. And there's only a few bands that hasn't happened with me, believe it or not. It
sounds like a Celtic player's career at the moment.
I know.
Like 3 seasons and then I'm away.
That's a brilliant link. Let's talk about Celtic. No, but we've been talking about the situation we currently find ourselves in. And, every single day I do my prep for the ACSOM bulletin, and every single day it's new names are getting thrown into the mix, and it gets to the point, JP, where you think as a Celtic fan you don't want to really invest in any of the names because there's so many of them. A lot of them are just getting put up by the bookies so that they pull in more bets. I mean, I even read this morning Sean Dyche is now on. You can't call it a shortlist anymore, it's a long list. There's so many managers being and you would expect that. So many managers being linked to the Celtic manager's position. But I did find it interesting the other day, and I know Colin and Amy spoke about it yesterday, but I found it interesting that it had been leaked by Hugh Keevins, of all people, that Eddie Howe had been approached by Celtic. I found that very interesting indeed, because I was along the way thinking that Celtic weren't going to go down that route. This is a conversation we had last Thursday. Mm-hmm. I had kind of convinced myself that Celtic were going to go down a more long-term, medium to long-term route in respect of the guy that they announced may not be a household name, mm-hmm. but it's bigger. It's part of a bigger master plan. But what did you make of the revelations that Eddie Howe has been approached?
Ubiquitous Hugh Keevins. I mean, I don't think Hugh Keevins is the type of guy that would put something out there unless he could hang his hat on it. I think he's been kind of ridiculed in the past for his own thoughts. Remember his comments on Moravchik and things like that. I mean, they came back to haunt him, and he's said other things, but they've been his opinions that have come back to haunt him rather than it being something that he's saying has happened. So I think there maybe is weight to it. I'm wondering whether Celtic are in this position. I'm talking about the board, that is, whether they're in this position where they're like, is this going to fly? If we do present a director of football and, up and coming coach who's not actually managed a team before, is that going to fly? And then they're obviously then maybe thinking maybe we should go down an Eddie Howe route, or I'm not going to throw Benitez into the mix there because I still think that's absolutely fanciful. But Eddie Howe does seem, everything that I've listened to, and even on this show, the way that Colin and Amy were talking about Eddie Howe and yourself as well, and talking about him, I don't think it's a bad appointment, but I was starting to train myself into thinking, well, it's going to be somebody like Enzo Maresca or Toussaint. Did I get that pronunciation right? I'm not sure.
We'll run with it, JP. We'll run with
it. So I just think it's thinking. I was starting to think, well, if that's what it's going to be, that's going to be. We're at a blank canvas stage in time, where we're kind of starting again almost after this ridiculous period of success that we've had. So, yeah.
I was the same, and I think that since we had that discussion last Thursday and this revelation has come out, I've even thought along the lines of, and I know that a lot of these managers that have been mentioned maybe wouldn't or haven't worked with a director of football in the past, so they may not be, suitable to the overall structure that we're planning as a club, JP, but it would actually be the best case scenario if we got in the director of football plus someone who could run the academy to that kind of degree that we've spoken about, and we were able to bring in a manager of the calibre that we've just mentioned. But I don't think somebody like Maresca would swap Man City for Celtic at the same level. He wouldn't see that as a step up, going from under 23 to under 23 or the development squad or whatever it's actually called these days at Celtic, because I know that that's a discussion we've had so often on this podcast, and it will come into this particular episode because, there's big question marks around the future of the Scottish game. I watched the Anne Budge interview with interest, and some of the comments she made in relation to next season, because I remember this time last year, and we were gearing up for the Rangers game at Ibrox, and that's when this whole thing started to unravel in terms of lockdowns, no fans in the stadium, etc. And the last game that was seen in person was the St Mirren game when Lee Griffiths scored a hat-trick. Seems so long ago.
And your anniversary is coming up 2 days, isn't it? Yeah.
I know. And the thing with that, JP, is in your mind you're kind of thinking, we'll be back in the stadiums by October. October was always this date. I felt October 2020, we'll be back. And it's not happened. And then it's extended. And then you write off this season eventually, because we're now in March, which is incredible. You write off this season. And Anne Budge's comments were along the lines of, it wouldn't surprise her if there was no full stadiums next season. What was your thoughts on that?
I mean, she's obviously, I would imagine somebody in her position has got some sort of inside intel into what may or may not happen, post this summer. I mean, it can't be ruled out. Do you know what I mean? I have conversations with people who are optimistic, and then I have conversations with people who shoot you down. I was in a taxi yesterday, and the girl was just like, "Oh, it's going to be another 2 years of this. We're going to go in and out of lockdowns another 2 years." And I was just like, I know that's a taxi driver, and I know that I can't take her word as gospel, but when people put those sort of thoughts into your mind, it does make you stop and think and go, God, is this going to be another year? And like you said in the title, how does that affect football clubs financially? Because how could clubs survive another season with no fans? I mean, the doomsday scenario of clubs falling by the wayside and actually going out of business has been long mooted since this started. But I think that becomes absolute reality at that point when, if you actually do consider that.
Without a doubt. Now, two things on the back of what you said there, JP. You were talking about taxi drivers. I got told a brilliant wee bit of insight. I was given a wee bit of insight the other week there. We all know how to, with regards to rumours, and it was always around transfer deadline day where somebody in Glasgow's in a taxi, and the taxi driver said this one or that one's been in the cab, he's picked them up, all this stuff. And this individual was telling me about how at a Premiership club in Scotland that they would basically have a couple of taxi drivers that they would utilise if they wanted to put a story out there And they would basically, even if that story was to try and disarm someone or their reputation, they would feed that story to these two taxi firms. And before you knew it, it was all over the city, which I almost named there. It was all over the city within a 48-hour period. And that became a rumour, which means it became the truth and it was gospel. And that person's reputation took an absolute bashing as a result of it. Incredible, the tactics that people will go to try and get that level of influence. But when, as you say, when it comes out of the Tynecastle camp and it's coming out of Anne Budge's mouth, you think to yourself, there must be some kind of truth in this. There must be some real worry and concern that, it's not just going to be the flick of a switch, JP, and everybody can go back to the games. Next season, after some deliberation, will be the first season that I buy my own wee boy his season ticket. This is going to be his first season ticket. I'm going to throw this out to anybody who's listening. Is he too young? He's 4. And I spoke to a couple of my mates who started taking their boys, their kids, at roughly the same age. They think it's great. I wasn't going to the games at 4. I was 7 before I started going to the games. So I don't know. What's your thoughts on that? Taking your bairn to the game? Is 4 too young? Because next season was my plan. That was when I was going to start taking him.
I know. I'm pretty sure I know of people who have been younger that have gone to games than 4. Because I've spoken to folk that I know who were like, "Oh yeah, I was there that day," and I'm like, "How could you possibly have been there that day?"
I know.
You must have been about 2 or 3, and he was like, "I know. My dad took me at 2 or 3," and I'm like, "Yeah, it's a bit." Sometimes I see kids with their parents at football matches, and the kids are just on their phone, or they're just it's like you've taken them to chapel or something like that. They're not really they don't really care what the.
Did you not pay attention, like JP?
At chapel?
Aye.
Not really. No.
Oh, this is turning into confession. Confession time.
I did when I ended up becoming an altar boy. You have to pay attention at that point, otherwise you make a fool of yourself in front of the congregation. So, no, I don't know. It just depends on what your child's attention span is like and whether or not they are actually properly into football, because it would seem a bit decadent to be spending that sort of money on taking a kid if they are just going to sit and play on their phone. Or I'm presuming your child doesn't have a phone at 4 years old.
No, he doesn't. He doesn't actually. But to be fair, he is trying to work out how to log into mine. But the thing is with the football, it's a difficult one because you do want them to enjoy it as well. You don't want them to be sitting there for a couple of hours bored. That's a big thing. And I mean, as I say, I went at 7, but the reasons behind that were twofold. Firstly, my old man worked away for several years leading up to that, so he certainly couldn't take me, and I was relying on uncles and cousins, older cousins, taking me. But also, even when he could take me, he didn't want to take me, JP, and that admission has, hurt me and scarred me for life. He didn't want me to be slowing down his drinking time with his mates. So when I go to the game, I go differently. I drive. I don't do the supporters bus thing anymore, and I don't go to the boozers before or after the game. I just go to the game and then I come home. So it would be easy in that respect. But, I see a couple of messages coming in saying that 4's a good age. I don't think his attention span would take the entire game in. So I'm going to have to miss some of the game. But there you go. Let me know your thoughts on that. The ACSOM audience who are tuning in on YouTube, Facebook and on Twitter, because it's always a pleasure to see these names popping up and get you involved in the chat. I'm going to be making as many of these comments public as possible because it's a massive question. How will this affect Celtic's rebuild? Mazar Yousaf, fans not being there isn't the biggest problem. Fans not renewing season tickets will have an adverse effect of which will be felt for at least the next 2 or 3 transfer windows and seasons. I mean, it is massive. We've had various discussions over the weeks and months leading up to where we are now, JP, around how people are going to view the renewing of their season tickets. A lot of people are saying they won't renew until big change has happened. Well, we've had the beginnings of the big change. We've had a CEO who has announced that he's retiring and his replacement has also been announced. We've had a manager who's been removed or has removed himself from the manager's chair. So we will definitely have a new manager in place for the following season. What do you think the attitude is now? I mean, is that the changes that we were looking for? Are more changes afoot?
I mean, without question, I think, there's going to be definitely a new management team installed. I don't think there's any danger that the current incumbents are going to be kept on beyond this season. So I think that'll be a big change. I think the sheer fact that people don't know what's going to happen in terms of how many people have said I'm not paying another £600 just to watch a rubbish stream or a poor quality presented stream. I've had issues with the Celtic season past the Paradise thing, where it's not worked or you've had trouble logging in. It's not been a disaster. I wouldn't say it's been a disaster, but ultimately you're just sitting, watching a game on your own in your house on a stream. It's not. You're not that. Your £600 is for the experience of going to the game. Do you know what I mean? It's not for watching it on the TV. So I think people will be reluctant to spend that sort of money. It would need to be if they do know that we're not going to be back in the stadium until potentially next year, if it's January or February or whenever next year. If they do know, then they will need to heavily subsidise that. And then, like the commenter said, that will impact, because if you're reducing the season ticket prices, and that's reducing, your potentially 50,000 persons investment into the club.
You talk about investment. I need to come back to the Mogwai thing, because something cropped into my mind there when you were talking. But you're talking about investment. I've spoken in the last week to someone who invests in the corporate side of the football club, JP. And I know that a lot of people who go to the game view them with a wee bit of suspicion, people who buy boxes and stuff like that. But this is a right lifelong Celtic supporter who just has the ability to invest a wee bit more than the likes of myself. His investment is not quite six figures, but it's not far off it. And he's not going to be investing the way that he's been investing since the 1990s, in actual fact, at the club. So it's season ticket holders, it's people like that who are investing a huge amount of their cash or their business's earnings as well. So yes, there's a lot of people still looking at the situation at the moment, not convinced that enough change has been made. But as you say, there's loads of other changes happening in the background. You were talking there about your virtual pass, and I mentioned at the weekend how obviously the Aberdeen game, I think it was 17 minutes before I got onto the Celtic virtual pass myself, and I had to watch it on Red TV. Would it not have been great timing to get Mogwai on before the game? That could have been your entertainment before the game. Number one, Glasgow band, Celtic supporters, get them in. Give us an hour before the game starts. Oh,
an hour gig. Well, unfortunately, I know the production costs that go into putting on a Mogwai gig, and it wouldn't be cheap. Put it that way. They would need to find a lot of extra capital to be able to put
added value. That could be our added value.
Oh yeah, but it would definitely cost Celtic a bit of money. I'm not talking about Mogwai's fee. I'm just talking about the actual production costs of getting people to set up the equipment, because they're not just going to go and set up next to Gordon Strachan and Stephen McManus and whoever's doing the hosting and just sort of play in that little gantry bit. It would be a bit phony if that was what they did.
I know, but added extra. I want Mogwai pre-match. That's what I want. Now, someone did make a comment, but unfortunately, it's disappeared from the screen, because when the comments come in thick and fast, that's what happens. But the question was, they were asking whether we would talk about the possibility that Celtic surrender the title at our home patch against Rangers, and your thoughts around that, JP. I've already suggested that we give them the full boona as they walk on the park, but we wear our black strips instead of the green and white hoops, just to remind them. Yeah. Anyway, what's your thoughts on that? I mean, that's the worst case scenario. That's just adding insult to injury this season, isn't it?
It is, but at the same time, watching that happen on a TV is a world away from sitting in your seat watching it. Do you know what I mean? I mean, sitting in your seat at the ground. And I'll go back to what I've said about this season, a few times. And this is a bit of a controversial comment, but see if you were to give me the opportunity of going back to my work, where I actually work, and this isn't all going on, and go back to DF and working in King Tut's tomorrow, as opposed to Celtic winning 10 in a row tomorrow, I would take my job and go back to my reality. And that is essentially why I'm not as affected as, I mean, I have wee pangs every now and then, but I'm going like, oh God, this is horrible. Like, how are we not winning the league? How have we not done this? We've been talking about it for so long. But then I just think to myself, there's so much, a bigger picture here. And it might, other people in their lives, they've not been affected and they've just kept on doing their job, and maybe they've had to work from home or whatever, and that's fine. But, in my life, I genuinely, it doesn't register as much. It tainted winning 9 in a row, this whole COVID thing, and it's going to, not affect me as much, losing the title. And I was watching something. It reminded me. There's a quote from a documentary that I texted you before this to ask you who this guy was, and I don't know who the guy is. I've even tweeted Graham Spears to ask him because I know he'll know. He might have responded. I don't know. But in the documentary, it's called Clash of the Titans, and it was came out in probably, I guess, 98 or 99. So it was after we'd stopped the 10. And it's a documentary just about the rivalry between Rangers and Celtic. It's got an anecdote from Peter Grant about a game he was playing, I think at Ibrox, and it was a sunny day, and he was going, I think, to take a throw in or something, and something whizzed by his ear, and he thought it was a bee. And then he looked down at the ground, and it was a golf ball with nails in it. And he was like, that's the level. He was trying to explain the significance of a Celtic Rangers game, and I think, well, in that anecdote, it certainly tells its own story. But this guy, a journalist, don't know his name. It's really annoying me. I think he's English, but he was living in Scotland. He may have passed on now, but he said, any neutral will say that was what should have happened. 9 in a row, 2 great clubs, both done wonderful things for this city. I question that. And it was right and proper that it should end in a draw. And that quote has haunted me since the start of this season, because I kept thinking they're going to win the league. And it's because some sort of higher power has actually decided that it can't be, we can't one up them. They couldn't one up us in 98, and we can't one up them now. And it's just, there you go.
Listen, it is a very, very good quote, and I couldn't identify who that was. You sent me a picture of them. It would maybe be an idea if you could send it to me. Actually, I could bring it up on the screen. Somebody out there might be able to tell us who that person is. If you WhatsApp it to me, JP.
It's Ian Archer. Paul McQuaid, the Shamrock, and on Twitter's got back, so it looks like Ian Archer in his later years. It is Ian Archer.
Wow, in his later years, because I think Archer on that, it was like a documentary style show that was on the TV as soon as Celtic won the league in 1988, and Archer there with the full head of hair. But now that you mention it, because if it is him in his later years, he does look a bit different. But now that you mention it, he was a fantastic writer. What a journalist he was, by the way. He was outstanding as a writer. Oh, absolutely superb. I mean, see, when you're doing some research for your book, or the books that I've been involved in, and you dig into the old archives of the newspapers, you see some absolutely phenomenal writing, JP. It's sadly been lost to the depths of time, I think, and I'm not criticising the journalists. I just think the nature of news now, nobody's waiting for the evening editions or the morning editions. Your news has to be produced by the second. It needs to be at your fingertips. So these phenomenal writers who would actually, pore over these pieces, these long form works of art, can no longer do it. They just can't do it now because they're pressurised into producing stuff. I'm not going to call it all clickbait, but a lot of it is, and it's just the state of play that we find ourselves in terms of the media. I found that other images that I'm going to bring up on the screen at some point during the show as well. But that's exactly who it is, Ian Archer. So what is it about the 9 then? Why is the 9 the sticky number? Why can't we get over the 9?
I don't know. Well, I mean, I was just saying I was in a taxi there. I had to go and do something before I started this, and it was a Rangers fan that was taking me, and I told him what I was coming back to do at 12:30, and he was like, "Oh, I'm a Rangers fan," and blah blah blah, and he was saying, that. He knew at the Ibrox game, he said, you threw everything at us, and we got a goal off a deflected, off a shoulder. And he said, I knew at that point. And but I said to him, look, I'm being honest with you. If COVID was not a thing, then things would be massively different, absolutely massively different. I couldn't tell you what would be the case. I honestly, he said, we would still win the league. We would still win the league. And I was like, well, maybe so, but I don't think it would be over at this point. I really don't, and I'll stand by that. And that's not me sticking up for Neil Lennon or trying to fly the Neil Lennon flag, because Neil Lennon made his own mistakes. that added to the problems. But you take the initial problems out of the way, and the ball and goalie thing, having to play catch up, players self-isolating, all of that nonsense, just disruption, constant disruption to plans. I think it would be a different story, but we just have to live with it as it is, and it's rubbish. It's horrible to lose this at this stage. But c'est la vie.
See, when you're talking there about all these other issues that were going on behind the scenes that didn't help, they certainly didn't help, JP, but you look at the situation Celtic were in terms of the squad that we had, the fact that we kept all our so-called best players, and we strengthened the squad to the tune of 6 new faces coming in, and you think, well, surely we would have had enough. We should have had enough if we approached it properly. And then you read into the comments made by Jeremy Frimpong.
Oh.
I know this has been spoken about this week, but there was a realisation there that you just don't get it. Because I always remember, no matter who you're speaking to or old interviews that you read, this thing about the step up to Celtic, even when you've played well for another Scottish club, the step up to Celtic is a bridge too far for a lot of players because they're not used to having that mentality of every single game must be won. And even a draw or a defeat, I'm not saying it's a crisis, but it's unacceptable. It's unacceptable at a club like Celtic. But most footballers never live in that environment, do they? So I did ask someone previously about players who really performed well for other Scottish clubs. Celtic buy them, you think that's a good acquisition. And it doesn't work out for them because that step up was a bridge too far. And I mean, I'm thinking about even fairly recently, players like Riordan at Hibs. I think when we signed him, he was probably one of, if not the best Scottish striker at that time in the league. We bought him and he did not transition well, did he? And a lot of players who have played in Scotland, Scott Allen, you watched him playing for Hibs before we signed him, and he looked tremendous. Oh. And he's looked very, very good since he went back. I know he's had his health issues kind of recently, but there is that transition. And I was looking at the comments made by Jeremy Frimpong, and I think to myself, you just don't have it. Was the big issue here, and I know he wasn't one of the new faces coming in, but it was too many new faces coming in who probably didn't have that state of mind, if you like, that Celtic state of mind, in terms of you don't have the mentality to play for this club.
Yeah, I think so. I think that's potentially nail on the head, really, because it's all very well, coming in and Scott Brown saying, right guys, this is a big season and all the rest of it, but it's not the same as having played, and they've not played in front of the fans. Do you know what I mean? That's a huge thing. Not played in front of the fans, and I'm not saying that all of a sudden Shane Duffy would be, the best centre half we've ever had if he'd played in front of, 3,000 or 4,000 fans away at St Mirren or something like that. Of course I'm not saying that, but I think there's a bit more of an impetus if you are playing in front of the supporters, and these guys coming in haven't had that experience, so they're just playing in empty stadiums. They're at a brand new club. It's a very weird situation, and they haven't really had time to sort of develop a bond almost with the club first of all, and then the fans as a result. So it just for them, it's just like they're playing another game of football, and okay, well we lost the game, so what? Nobody, if they don't really pay attention to social media, as a lot of them don't, there's a lot of them don't really care about social media. Everybody thinks everybody's on it all the time, but I don't necessarily think that. I think players will probably steer themselves away from it. So ultimately, they're not getting any positive or negative, reaction to their performances. So therefore, it's just like, oh, another game next week then, and you're like, well, another game in a season where we're going for a record 10th title. It's like,
yeah.
It's kind of a big deal here, unless you've missed that. But
no, you're spot on, because it doesn't add to the pressure that they already have as being professional footballers playing for a big club. The added pressure, I feel, comes from us It comes from the stands, doesn't it? I mean, back in the day, you know, the media in terms of newspapers were, you know, they could create a pressure. They could create a buzz. Of course they could. I mean, some of the titles in Scotland were selling about 1 million a day. You know, that was the distribution at that time. Now, as you say, you can switch yourself off from that as long as you just don't pick up your phone. And I think I said that quite early on in the season. I'd have banned Lee Griffiths from social media. I would have banned him from it. Just don't go near it. Now, at the top of this show, if you think I've been rude and checking my phone, I was looking for an image because that jersey behind you, there was a wee feature in my forthcoming book. There's a plug. Don't know when it's coming out, but it will come out. I promise it will come out. I did a feature in the book, which was, let's choose 3 or 4 of the most kind of ghastly jerseys, or the ones that divided opinion, JP, right? And give them a wee facelift. See if we can improve them a wee bit. And I got a fantastic artist called Made by Frankie. You might have seen Made by Frankie on Twitter. She does brilliant artwork to basically manipulate and modify these jerseys. So that one behind you, I looked at that and I thought, you know what? That would look better in a different colourway, right? So here we go. I'm going to bring it up on the screen. And maybe everybody's going to disagree, but I thought it looked better. Oh, you can't see it. I'm going to have to move. I thought it looked better. It looked better in black and green. Do you get the vibe?
Yeah, I get the idea, and I'm already completely on board with it. I think there's a job at Adidas for you. There might have been a job at Adidas for me when I used to draw strips when I was 10, 11, 12, and I was obsessed with Celtic getting an Adidas top, and I drew, you know, these basically Adidas equipment tops, but as Celtic tops, and then so to get Adidas as a strip sponsor has been brilliant for me. You know, I was like so excited at that prospect because I'm a Celtic strip geek.
Yeah, you're a geek, but that's all right because I'm determined to show everybody this. So I will eventually figure out how to show you at some stage. But you see, talking about that designing strips kind of carry on, right? One of the strips actually was designed by Simon Weir. Now, you know Simon Weir, the actor. He was in Trainspotting 2. He's a big Celtic fan. He's been on ACSOM. He played Jailhouse in Trainspotting 2. He designed the European jersey from the 1986 season. You know, the white one, and it had the green and the black at the top.
Oh, yeah.
He designed that jersey and sent it into Davy Hay, who passed it on to Umbro. Simon Weir designed that jersey, which I just find absolutely insane. But I found that out by chance when I was doing research for his book by speaking to Simon, and that's what he told me, and he showed me the letter from Davy Hay to prove that it was his design, and he still had some of his artwork which was proper like felt tip pen artwork. It was brilliant. So these are the kinds of stories that you can expect to see in my forthcoming book, which obviously I'm not trying to plug here, but yes, I'll let you know when it comes out. So looking forward to next season, I found it interesting this week that Conor Hazard signed a new deal, and Conor Hazard signed a new improved 2-year contract. Now obviously he came in that game against Lille, didn't he, alongside Sorrow and Turnbull, and you know, up until a point he was basically being spoken about in the same breath as Sorrow and Turnbull in terms of these are a kind of positive that's come out of this season, JP. They've come in, players that ordinarily may not have made an appearance, yet they look as though they have bedded in. That's not where we are at the moment with Conor Hazard, is it? I mean, where do you think it went wrong for him this season?
I just think that he didn't cover himself in glory in the cup final, did he? I mean, that was a bit of a ropey display in the second half. But then he goes and saves the penalties in the shootout. So you know, you can't chastise him too much, I don't think. But I just think that he was maybe they didn't want to play him regularly if it was going to be a really tough time of it. Do you know what I mean? In terms of, you know, just having him attached to this run of, you know, mediocrity and losing. Oh, there you go, Paul Elliott. That's amazing.
It's cool, eh?
Yeah. I mean,
so basically, that jersey behind you should have been black and white and green. In my opinion, in my humble opinion. So Made by Frankie made up this mock, and there's quite a few of them, and it was to form a chapter in the book where we were looking at how, you know, how strip, it's changed. It's a big thing now, the unveiling of the new strips, JP.
Oh, yeah.
And then you get these amazing guys and girls online who design potential jerseys, and how that is now a thing. Whereas 20 years ago it really wasn't. But yeah, there you go. There was the design. I think we'll just keep that. Looks better than the image that was up there before. We'll just keep that there. But that was it. And there's a few others.
I tell you what, Adidas could do a number on that with the instead of the Umbro badge, obviously have the trefoil. You know, the proper Adidas badge. Like
Absolutely.
If they could do that, but with that top, that would be. I think that would be a lot of folks on a lot of folks.
Will we go for the half? Yeah, there we go. Right. So yeah, that was my idea, and there was a few others. Sorry to interrupt you there, but we're talking about Conor Hazard.
We didn't maybe just want to attach him to a run that they could see was unfolding, you know, and maybe thought, right, we'll just take him out the firing line. You know, we don't want to. You know, we can see he's got long-term prospects. We don't want to damage his progress. So we'll just give it to Scott Bain instead. I mean, that sounds really harsh, but you know, it's so weird, the whole situation with goalkeepers, how we've jumped about from Barkas to Bain to Hazard back to Bain. You know, Barkas is currently, who knows where he is.
I know.
I really hope he's all right. Yeah, I hate speaking, because when you speak about things like this, you have no idea. Like we've spoken about this before, you have no idea what's going on in someone's life in terms of their background, because a lot of people don't know what's going on in your life or my life, and you know, we come on here and we're all, hey, you know, talking and everything's great. Then you come off and you're like, well, actually, I've got stuff to deal with, you know, and you might have stuff to deal with. You don't know. So that may be why he's not in the team. It might not be purely football.
We touched on that a few weeks back, didn't we? We were talking about Ajeti. And as football fans and the fickleness of the game, you just criticise a player because they're not playing well, you know, and he's rubbish, and get him dropped and give Griffiths a run or give somebody else a run. But I think that does come into it, especially with Barkas, whereby, you know, Ajeti obviously was at West Ham, so, you know, in terms of a British culture, if there is such a thing, the day-to-day life of it, he has adapted to a degree to that whilst he was in London. But Barkas hasn't, has he? He's come over from Greece. I think he's played his whole football career in Greece. He's come over here, and it's in abnormal circumstances whereby he doesn't have that, let's get to know the city, you know, let's get to know even another couple of players and their wives or partners, and then, you know, get to know them. We all know the Scandinavian guys used to socialise together. We know that back in Larsson's day in Mjällby, and even, you know, and the Dutch players of both sides, Celtic and Rangers, used to meet up and they would go out with their wives to get to know the city and certain restaurants. All of that's been torn up, and not just that. You know, these guys, many of them are living their lives in hotel rooms, and that must be really tough. So it does take us on to the Barkas question, because we've heard every so often you get a right good bit of information coming through from a good source, and you put that in a wee box and you think, I believe that might be true. Then everything else goes into the WhatsApp rumour kind of box, doesn't it? And you've heard the rumours that Barkas fell out with Lenny dropped him and all this kind of stuff. But I look at that and think, well, he's completely disappeared from the 20-man squad. He's not on the bench. Someone suggested that he may be injured. I don't think the club are about to write off the investment of 10 million quid, JP, on him and Ajeti. No. I think that you know, any incoming manager would need to assess them and see if they can get a tune out of one, if not both of them. And I know that I've compared the Martin O'Neill arrival as being very much like next season. There's loads that's different in terms of the investment that we put into that management team and the players he brought in. But what he did have is he had a clutch of players there who had come in for big money, and we all know what happened to Berkovic. We know that obviously he decided to cash in on Viduka, and he used that money to bring in Sutton. We know what happened to Raphael Scheidt. It just didn't work out for him in Scotland. But one player he did resurrect who had come in and didn't look great. I know Kevin Graham says that he had a couple of good games, was Petrov. I thought that, you know, O'Neill came in and rejuvenated Petrov's career. And whoever's coming in might be looking at the two big buys that we've brought in, and he might be able to get a player out of Barkas or Ajeti. Have they shown anything, in your opinion, based on what we've seen, that one or both of them might still have a future at Celtic?
Yeah, they have. I think it's... it's the fact that we haven't seen a lot of Barkas that makes you think, well, there could be something there. If we'd seen so much of him, we'd have been able to form an opinion, and a reasonable football fan's opinion on whether or not he was good enough to be the number one. But I think that the fact, the hard cold fact is we've not seen enough of him to be able to sort of cast he's not good enough, get rid of him, get shot of him. I've not seen anything to tell me that he's some sort of calamity-strewn keeper that isn't up to standard. The guy's an international player. He's played the Champions League for AEK Athens. I know they're not a European heavyweight or anything, but there's they've probably been in or around group stages more than we have in the last few years. Somebody will correct me on that. I'm sure they will in the comments. They're probably not. but the same with Ajeti, I don't think Ajeti is a terrible player. I think, he clearly did the business for Bal. Didn't get an opportunity at West Ham for whatever reason. Came in and battered in goals early doors when he wasn't supposedly fit. Might not still be fit. Who knows? That this fitness things that hung over the club for, we're now in March and there's still fitness chat, which is mad. But
it's absurd.
Was it Kevin Russell that we're talking about? That Kev had heard from, was it George Connolly, that you're never really match fit until you've played like sort of 10 games or 11 games in a row. And that might if that is the case, then it's probably you need more now. So I would not be expecting Ajeti and Barkas to be written off unless, of course, they don't want to be here anymore. In which case, then that's out of our hands. But if they want to be here and want to fight for a position in the team, then I can't see why they would go elsewhere.
Yeah, I think we'll get one. I do. I think we'll get a player out of that pair. You mentioned George Conley. Big happy birthday to George on the 1st of March. Big George is doing well. Still in touch with him. One of the greats from the Quality Street Gang era, alongside a certain Kenny Dalglish who turns 70 today. Really? It's incredible, isn't it? It's incredible that King Kenny turns 70 today. But it does take us onto the subject of Quality Street Gang. The whole tradition that Celtic had of rearing our own youth, and we're talking about Connor Hazard. And, the big thing about the way that I like the new structure being perhaps bringing someone in who is able to scout the market for the best young talent in Britain, because generally speaking, we will be looking a hell of a lot at the British market, JP. That's probably how I like to look at it. Maybe 3 or 4 young players coming through on a year-to-year basis, because let's face it, Celtic are going to have to start focusing again on youth. I mean, how long do you think that would take, though? Because I don't think we got enough from the Hibs and the Livy games in January to suggest that we've got half a dozen players bubbling under the surface. I don't think we've seen enough. They young kids weren't ready for the first team, were they?
No, and it wasn't the right circumstance to bring them in as well. The pressure in those games, despite there being no supporters there, that was us absolutely rolling dice at that point, just to try and get a win. And we nearly got away with it and until that last minute equaliser from Hibs. That might have changed the complexion of how we were, doing things. Because it's fine margins like that. You think back to those 2 games and you're just like, if we'd won them, anyway, there's if buts and maybes. But I think, I don't think the circumstances were right to be reading, up and coming youngsters in that game, because it's just like, they weren't playing alongside the regular first team players. There was obviously some of them were there, but it wasn't like you were bringing in a player into a sort of 9 or 10 strong first team essentially, where I think that's where you'll really find that it helps those players when they come into, like bringing when we brought Aidan McGeady in, that Celtic team that we brought Aidan McGeady into was a strong first team. Look at some of the players that he was playing with. So it's things like that. But I definitely want to see a focus on bringing our own, Scottish players through, because you want to see more Kieran Tierney's, you want to see more Callum McGregor's, things like that, James Forrest. You want to see these guys, and it feels like we've sort of got them and we're dining out on them, and we have been dining out on them for a long time, but you only dine out on them, they'll be getting to like 30, and where's the replacements? Where's the next lot, you know?
Precisely. I mean, you're looking at Jamesy Forrest and Callum McGregor getting to that stage of their career now, into their late 20s, which, by the way, is very young for somebody like me. But I know in terms of football, JP, into their late 20s. And as you say, where is the next wave? And we could say, well, we had Kieran Tierney as well. Incidentally, Ray Parlour talking about Tierney as a future Arsenal captain. It just shows you the quality that we had in Tierney, and we all knew the quality we had in Tierney. But where's the next wave, you know? And I think that when you're looking at the wave of talent coming through, I'm not at the stage where I think that we can produce, you know, very similar to the Lisbon Lions, where the vast majority of that side came through the ranks. I know the game's changed, but with Jeremy Frimpong's comments the other day, JP, it really rung home to me once again that, you know, if you look at the makeup of your squad, and 8 or 9 of them have been signed from all over the globe, do they really get it? Do they really understand, you know, what it takes to play for a club like Celtic? And that's my biggest concern. And I think that we always need to have that nucleus. You know, that nucleus of 3 or 4 players. You mentioned Peter Grant earlier when you were talking about that yellow kit behind you. And I know that Peter the Pointer divided opinion, but there was one thing about him.
I loved him.
He loves Celtic, and, you know, 100% every single game, good, bad or ugly. My best memories of him was the Airdrie Cup final, of course, where he played with an injury and he got a man of the match. Just talking about your jersey, actually, we've got a comment coming in from Martin Bickett, who says the green and gold is amazing. So he'd be quite happy with the original. Alan Robertson reminds us, Paul Elliott, there's the defender. Yeah. Absolutely. And there's a few others coming in. Cormac Ryan thinks that the black and green one is smart, although we would have had the iconic pinstripe shortly after. Absolutely. As worn by Stuart Slater. And Stuart Slater was interviewed by myself for a Celtic State of Mind. We're working on that interview, and that'll be coming out at the weekend. So it was a dial-in. Stuart Slater's doing well, came in, spoke about his Celtic career, JP, and that'll be out this weekend on the day that we're not playing. So I just think that, you know, it's one of these things that it's probably not by design, but Celtic will have to have more of a focus on bringing in far more of our youth players. And it's a shame that we've lost, or are going to lose, a real crop of players, haven't we, to other clubs over the last several months and in the coming months, because I'm pretty sure Dembele and Okoflex are looking to move elsewhere as well.
Yeah, no, it's that is concerning that we, you know, have, in the same way that we've taken players from Man Cities and, you know, players and clubs like that, other clubs are doing it to us. At the very early stage, at the embryonic stage in a player's career, when they're, you know, just starting to knock on the door of maybe getting into the squad of the first team or whatever. So yeah, I think, but then that's up to whoever comes in as the manager. Obviously, I think will be tasked with being heavily focused on youth development, because, you know, the shackles of this dynasty of 9 in a row and 10 in a row, that isn't, those are now gone, and it's a good thing as well as a bad thing that it's gone, I think, because it just stops this obsession with charging towards it, and it feels like we've been very reactive in terms of, you know, like, even I know the Shane Duffy signing hasn't worked out, but, you know, I would have far rather we were signing not a project, I hate that word, but, you know, a developing player in a centre half position like we did with Odsonne Edouard. Like, why were we not signing a centre half in a similar vein to Odsonne Edouard? You know, paying a decent fee to a club at a young age, and then having him play through the last few years. And instead, we just had to like panic and go and get a guy on loan from Brighton, you know, and pay big stupid wages to a guy and just throw money away. Where it could have been more carefully considered.
It could have, and, you know, actually on that point, I would take it a wee stage further, because under the surface we had a player in Stephen Welsh, who I think this season has proven, JP, that he was ready to make that step up. The problem with Stephen Welsh, I felt, maybe in his earlier performances, was the fact that we hadn't bedded him into that squad but before we did. I mean, he'd only played one game for Celtic before he was thrown in to the first Rangers game this season. And, you know, I remember the picture after the game. You remember him sitting there in the stand with his head in his hands, right behind Olivier.
Yeah.
You know, Olivier and Cham. The young kid was gutted. I think he's done enough since then for me to be, you know, our first pick at the moment. I know that Chris Jullien is obviously injured, and we didn't see that coming. He's been injured twice this season. But it does prove that we had that kid under the surface, that, you know, had we managed him properly with his development and given him enough games, we would have known what he was you know, capable of. And we might have looked at that situation and thought, well, we don't need to bring in Shane Duffy because we've got Welsh there. But because we had managed that situation so poorly, we didn't have that in our locker. And I find that's the short-sightedness that the 10 in a row brought. I'm not sitting here saying I didn't want to win 10 in a row. Of course I did. But it did bring with it a short-sightedness. And, you know, I think one of the best examples of that would undoubtedly be... Yeah, but I think that's how Lennon manages, isn't it? Yeah. I mean, I think, was it Carragher that came out and said Benitez... Similarly, I'm not comparing Lenny with Benitez, but he's not interested in anything other than 11 guys on the park. He's interested in the first team. It's not about having that model where the under-12s are playing the same style as the first team and everybody can make the step up right through the ranks to the first team. There's plenty of managers like that. You know, I don't know. I didn't know that about Benitez, but, you know, it puts me off him, I've got to say, because I think we need to be looking more long-term, JP.
Oh, definitely.
And, you know, Stephen Welsh, for me, if we're going to look at positives to take from this season, he's a positive. I'm still going to say Conor Hazard was a positive. I know that he's not in the team at the minute, and obviously Turnbull and Sorrow are, and I'm hoping to see Sorrow at some stage back in the side. Be it John Kennedy, which I don't think it will be long-term, or someone else assessing this group of players, would it not make sense to be playing guys like Ayeti, El Yunusi, Barkas, giving them some game time, JP, to say, well, we need to decide whether or not we're going to keep you for next season. Let's give you a run of 7 games now. And I think one of the big ones would have been Barkas. I really don't know what the situation is with him at the moment. And I don't know what the situation is with Nir Beaton just now, because he's disappeared from view as well. And I don't think it's been confirmed that he's injured, but he's certainly not in the first team squad. Would it not make more sense to give these guys and Sorrow as well more game time?
Yeah, I think people were all really intrigued as to what the side would be last Saturday against Aberdeen. And I was too. I didn't expect there to be massive changes because I just didn't think that, you know, he was in a position to start being a bit gung-ho in his team selection. You know what I mean? It was always going to be fairly similar. And I think I still stand by it. I know people were looking for positives after the first half and saying, oh, there was a different zip and energy and all the rest of it. For me, I just thought I saw the same Celtic team that has been playing for the last few weeks, months even, you know, doing you know, pretty well in the first half, getting a goal, deflected goal, and goal's a goal and all that. But and then the second half we just sort of fell away. So I'm more interested now in how he plays the team on Sunday and how he evaluates what he saw on Saturday and how he then makes any changes to that. Or does he just go the same again? Or does he actually make changes and try something different in a formation, bring El Yunusi in potentially to start, maybe a Yeti as well, or does he stick with Klimala? All of these things are... I'm more interested now on how he reacts to his first game going into Tannadice on Sunday, which I actually looked up. I can't believe I've not been to Tannadice for 20 years.
Wow.
20 years I've not been to Tannadice. Now, I've never said I'm the biggest Celtic fan in the world. I'm just a Celtic fan, just like everybody who's watching this. You know, some people might not have been to Tannadice at all, fair enough. But I can't believe it's been that long. And actually, here is my ticket from that day. And that signature is the bold Robert Douglas. Met him in the the petrol station on the way back.
I love it. I love your random meets with Celtic players, JP. They're becoming legendary.
I just went up to him and we-guyed him in the petrol station. I'm not his mate. He's not my pal. Just in case anybody's trying to say, "Oh, you're pals with Robert Douglas." No, I'm not pals with Robert Douglas. I met him once. He was in a petrol station outside Dundee, and I got his autograph on my ticket. And we won 4-0. And the team was Douglas in goal, Mjallby, Valharan, Vega, Peta, McNamara, Petrov, Lennon, Agat, Larson, and Sutton. What?
Vega, another wee plug. We obviously we interviewed Vega, the big man Ramon, and he was interviewed, I think it was 3 or 4 weeks ago. So check that out on the YouTube channel if you can, because
I have to watch that, by the way. I have to hold my hands up. I've not watched the Vega interview yet, and I got caught in an unlikely internet trap last night. I think Laura Bradburn had tweeted Russell Boyce's thing that he does with his mate about on Twitch. I'm not familiar with Twitch that much. I know what it is. It's like a streaming thing, but it's unbelievable. Him and his mate playing Championship Manager and just talking nonsense. It was brilliant. Like I think they've got Championship Manager from maybe the late 90s. So they've got
love that game.
They were playing as Napoli and they were having patter over because the guy's mate had bought Pirlo. And then Russell was like, "Oh, get Pirlo off. He's rubbish. He's not been. Look at his stats. His stats are terrible." And that's worth a watch if you're into that kind of thing.
Well, I am, because I'm of a certain vintage, JP. I will be tuning in. But talking to a certain vintage, there's always this big chat about the great Celtic jerseys of the past. And obviously, I've now dug up all 4 images that were made by Frankie. And I'm going to share one with you, another one. This was based on 2 jerseys. The first one was the Hampden third kit. You'll remember it. Van Hooijdonk wore it. It had a gold arm, a green arm, and it had this kind of zigzag design. And I always felt that the zigzags ruined it because it looked like a tricolour, and it would have been better if it was simplified.
That's
so we got
onion, right?
Yeah, yep. And we got it simplified, right? And we changed the badge a wee bit to the shamrock. And it could only be one player wearing this, and it was wee Brian McLaughlin. So here you go.
Eddie Munster.
There he is.
Cool. Yeah.
And we went back to the Umbro double diamond in sleeves as well, just for the classic look.
Yeah.
But I'd buy that.
Shamrock badge as well.
Shamrock badge, yeah, I'd buy that jersey.
I like the Shamrock badge. I don't like the Shamrock badge on the current black third strip. I wish they'd just kept it the original Celtic badge rather than the Shamrock. I know people are divided on that, but I'd rather have had the Celtic badge on the black kit.
I think John Hemphill is bored there talking about Celtic jerseys. So let's talk about the Scottish Cup. Yeah. And when I saw the fixtures, well, not the fixtures, but the dates coming in, I was looking at it and I kind of thought to myself, what if we win that? What if John Kennedy wins it? JP, does it change anything?
No, absolutely. It didn't change anything for Kenny Dalglish when he won the League Cup in the year 2000. And that's Kenny Dalglish. Do you know what I mean? So, there was no clamour for him to get the job full time as a result of that. So, no. Obviously, yeah, I'd like to win it, but I mean, it's hard to get excited about a Scottish Cup or a Scottish Cup run and then winning it when you're not getting to experience it. Do you know what I mean? I honestly don't think that there's the same level of excitement about games. Even if we were in a position to be winning the title, it still would have a huge like dent in it for me that we're not there and celebrating it, and we can't even go out to the pub and celebrate it, never mind go to the game. So the Scottish Cup, yes, I'd love to win it to keep our run going, which would surely be unprecedented if we did win it. I guess it's something positive to look forward to. But I love going to the away grounds in the Scottish Cup early rounds and all that. Going back to grounds that you've not been to before, or maybe not been to for years and years. Like when we played, did we not play Albion Rovers recently? We had to play did we play at Airdrie's ground? I was at it. Scott Sinclair scored an absolute raker. Mm-hmm. And then just stuff like Stranraer away and all that. Like had some great trips in the Scottish Cup over the years, and that's as big a part of it as anything else, Even if you go and see a rubbish game, at least you're experiencing the game and the banter and everything on the bus and stuff.
The big thing about the away games you're talking about is that it's almost a wee step back in time. For me it is. And it reminds me of that time when I started going to the games and things were a wee bit more kind of innocent in terms of the facilities and the stadiums and all that kind of stuff. So you have that wee step back in time and you do enjoy it. I don't know if I'd like to go back there permanently, to be honest with you, but it's nice to dip your toe in from time to time.
Yeah.
Someone's asking if it's John for the Port, and I get that because John Hemphill, believe it or not, there was a John Hemphill who was with Celtic during the Quality Street Gang era, and he went to the 1968 tournament in Italy with the aforementioned Conley and Dalglish. So it may well be the same John Hemphill who was part of that team, interestingly enough. Okay. But yeah, the Scottish Cup, I think, for me, the way I'm kind of viewing this, because of the disastrous season we've had, JP, is we've got to start the rebuild somewhere. And I think that some of the signs we've already seen, Peter Lawwell is moving on. We've got Dominic Mackay coming in. Neil Lennon has moved on. We don't know who we're getting coming in. Could we finish this season on a high by winning the Scottish Cup? I hope we can. And what does that mean for John Kennedy? Well, I already think that Kennedy will still be at Celtic. I just don't think he'll be the manager of Celtic for next season. So I want to win. I've said this so many times. I want to win every time Celtic take the field. I want us to win every tournament, and I want us to go. And basically, it's a start, isn't it? It's a start of the rebuild. And let's get some success into some of the new players who haven't enjoyed any kind of success this season at Celtic. And let's do what we are accustomed to. Let's start winning trophies again. And let's start with the Scottish Cup. So whether or not you think it should have been shoehorned into the season, those fixtures, is another thing. But it's happened. And for any number of reasons. And let's go and win it. That's certainly my view on it. Now, JP, it's always brilliant to speak to you on a Thursday, but we're missing wee Deck today. Wee Deck's at the dentist, so unfortunately he couldn't join us. He'd rather be at the dentist than be on a Celtic State of Mind.
I'm sure he wouldn't rather be there. No.
But thanks to everyone who has joined us on the chat today. It's really appreciated. You've joined us on YouTube, Facebook and Twitter, and if you are watching on YouTube live or later on, make sure you subscribe, because we're building a channel that puts out as much content as possible. It's not always me that's going to be there, JP, because I'm trying to build up other channels on there. But for example, you'll be aware of Amy Canavan, who joins Colin on a Wednesday. Amy's got her own football show. She's already interviewed Jock Brown, so there's a Celtic interest there. And she's got other Celts lined up that she'll be interviewing as well. So we're trying, obviously, to build the free content, get onto YouTube and enjoy it. All that's left for me to say once again, as always, JP, thanks for joining me on a Celtic State of Mind.